Here's a fun little moment nobody talks about at dinner. When you're not worried your card will decline, you're worried your brain will judge you for ordering like an adult with confidence, which means your brain instantly declares a financial emergency. Not because you're broke, but because it treats every purchase like it could be the opening scene of a very preventable money documentary. So your brain starts cardio over one dinner bill, sprinting through worst-case scenarios, burning decision energy like calories, until it's too mentally tired to think about anything financially useful. Which is why you end up making tiny, safe decisions all day. Because big financial moves require thinking power, and your brain already spent that arguing about appetizers. And honestly, this training starts early. Watching things get put back at checkout, learning that wanting something is slightly irresponsible, and spending automatically triggers a quiet family-level crisis. So you grow up, make adult money, pay adult bills, but that childhood alarm system never upgrades. It still reacts to normal spending like you're seconds away from financial collapse. And the ironic part is you start calling this discipline like you've mastered money, when really you've just trained fear to wear a respectable outfit. And society reinforces it too, praising you for being responsible, careful, financially mature, while quietly ignoring the fact that your risk tolerance never left childhood. Because while you're busy protecting every dollar like it's endangered, you're often missing the part where money is supposed to grow, not just sit safely in emotional storage. So instead of planting money where it can breathe and expand, you lock it up like it's dangerous, proudly protecting it from the very growth it was meant to experience. And over time, the irony compounds, because the money you guarded so carefully stays almost the same, while riskier money out there quietly evolves into something much larger, which is how extreme safety quietly turns into stagnation, because wealth usually grows through movement, and yours is strapped to the ground under layers of emotional seatbelts. And this mindset doesn't stop at spending, it leaks into earning too, keeping you loyal to safe paychecks while riskier opportunities stand nearby waving like ignored emails. So even when it's time to ask for more, your brain whispers, "Stay grateful, don't push it," and suddenly you're negotiating your own value downward like it's a clearance sale. And over years, this compounds. You start pricing your time, skills, and effort cautiously low, while louder people charge premium rates with half your competence. Which is why investing feels terrifying, because releasing money into markets feels less like strategy and more like emotional skydiving without a backup parachute. And the delay feels harmless at first, but compounding rewards time, not caution. So waiting for emotional comfort quietly costs more than most financial mistakes ever will, because the brain keeps waiting for some magical feeling of readiness, like confidence arrives first, when in reality it usually shows up late after action already happened. So overthinking starts feeling productive, like you're preparing responsibly, when really you're just rehearsing safety while opportunity waits patiently for you to stop researching, and slowly it starts becoming visible. The safer path you trusted so deeply was never designed to make you wealthy, only comfortable enough to feel temporarily secure. And that realization gets uncomfortable, because you start seeing that what felt like responsibility might actually be fear wearing your personality like a costume, which is when the small regrets start surfacing. Not dramatic ones, just subtle thoughts about chances you declined while feeling proud of being financially careful. And the perspective widens. You begin noticing how different financial lives were shaped by risk tolerance, not intelligence, which feels both enlightening and mildly insulting. So part of you wants to evolve financially, but another part clings to safety like it's emotional oxygen, making progress feel weirdly disloyal to your own identity. So now your brain begins negotiating internally, trying to upgrade financially without triggering its own fear alarms, like convincing a nervous system that growth isn't a personal threat.
So the experiments begin cautiously, tiny investments, small risks, testing growth the way someone checks water temperature before committing their whole existence.
And when nothing catastrophic happens, your brain gets confused first, then curious, slowly realizing that growth doesn't always come packaged with disaster. And as evidence builds, fear starts losing volume, not disappearing, just becoming less authoritative, like an outdated advisor still invited to meetings but no longer in charge. So confidence doesn't arrive dramatically, it creeps in quietly, built from repeated proof that growth is survivable, and occasionally even enjoyable. And fear doesn't vanish either, it just becomes background noise, still present, still whispering, but no longer steering every financial decision like it used to.
Which is when you finally see it clearly. Safety was never the destination, just the starting point you weren't meant to stay parked in forever.
Because emotional comfort and financial expansion rarely sit in the same chair. One feels safe immediately, the other pays off later after discomfort stops negotiating. So the real upgrade isn't eliminating fear, it's reorganizing it, letting caution inform decisions without allowing it to dominate your financial direction entirely.
And once you see both paths clearly, the choice becomes less emotional and more strategic, like realizing safety was protecting survival, not building prosperity.
So fear doesn't get fired completely, it just gets reassigned. Still useful for caution, but no longer qualified to run your financial life decisions.
And with that shift, money stops feeling like something to defend constantly and starts behaving more like a tool you're allowed to use strategically.
Which is when perception itself changes, money stops looking like danger to manage and starts looking like leverage to expand what's possible.
So the difference was never money itself, it was whether you treated it like something to store or something to grow deliberately.
And that mindset split explains everything. One person protecting money endlessly, the other partnering with it to create expansion beyond what saving alone could ever accomplish.
Because money locked for protection stays obediently still, while money placed into motion starts behaving like a system that multiplies effort beyond linear limits.
And that balance feels calmer than expected, because growth stops feeling reckless once fear becomes informed instead of dominant.
So stepping beyond comfort stops feeling irresponsible and starts feeling necessary, like realizing safety was meant to launch you, not contain you. And once you move forward, you realize comfort never actually disappeared. It just redefined itself around progress instead of avoidance. So eventually, safety and growth stop competing and start cooperating, turning financial progress into something sustainable instead of emotionally exhausting. And at that point, financial decisions stop being fear reactions and start becoming direction choices guided by intention instead of survival instincts.
So looking back, the shift was never about becoming reckless. It was about becoming calibrated, aligning caution with opportunity instead of letting it suffocate momentum.
And strangely enough, the journey feels less stressful now, because growth guided by awareness feels safer than safety driven by anxiety ever did. So in the end, it's not about choosing fear or growth. It's about learning to use both intentionally without letting either hijack your financial future.
And zooming out even further, you realize the real risk was never growth itself. It was staying financially motionless while time kept moving without you.
Because once money enters motion, systems begin doing work you can't manually replicate, while idle money just waits politely for inflation to reduce its relevance.
So letting go of overprotection feels less like loss and more like upgrading how money works for you behind the scenes.
Wealth isn't built by choosing between saving and growth, it's built by sequencing them intelligently without emotional overcorrection. So emotional maturity around money isn't eliminating fear, it's learning how to position it without letting it distort your financial judgment.
Because ultimately, wealth behaves less like a possession and more like a current, rewarding movement while quietly penalizing stagnation. And ironically, the more you engage with that movement, the less threatening it feels, because familiarity replaces imagined catastrophe surprisingly fast.
So the smartest financial behavior isn't choosing caution or expansion, it's integrating both into a playbook flexible enough to adapt as life evolves.
Because control over money doesn't come from gripping it harder, it comes from positioning it where it can perform beyond your direct effort.
And looking back at old habits feels almost nostalgic, like remembering a version of yourself that valued security more than possibility.
So wealth finally makes sense when protection, expansion, and systems operate together instead of competing for control.
And that's when you notice the real upgrade. Money no longer needs constant supervision because structure replaces anxiety as the operating force, which leaves you with a strangely calm realization. Wealth built correctly feels less like hustle and more like alignment. And once you see that contrast clearly, it becomes harder to romanticize struggle when structure quietly outperforms effort, which is why this shift rarely happens alone. It usually begins when perspective expands beyond your own financial instincts. Because awareness spreads quietly, once you see how money actually behaves, it becomes difficult to go back to reacting emotionally, which is where conversations like this begin to matter. Not because they change money, but because they change how you interpret it. And sometimes the most valuable shift isn't tactical at all. It's simply realizing you're not the only one recalibrating how you approach wealth. So, if this perspective feels uncomfortably accurate, that's usually a sign you're closer to financial clarity than you think. Which is also why perspectives like this are worth revisiting occasionally. Just to keep fear from quietly reclaiming authority.
So if any part of this perspective resonated slightly more than expected, that's probably not accidental, which usually means you'll want more perspectives like this interrupting your financial autopilot occasionally, so subscribing is probably a rational financial decision. And don't worry, we'll keep translating complicated financial psychology into uncomfortable clarity so you don't have to overthink it alone. So if you genuinely enjoy financial clarity delivered with mild psychological discomfort, you already know what to do next.
So if this perspective made your financial anxiety slightly more productive, do like, subscribe, comment, and share it with someone still negotiating with their fear.